Beyond the Gate spoilers tease that Regina's resolve hardened the moment she learned the truth. The air that morning had been brittle with winter frost, but what cut sharper was Jacob and Naomi's revelation about Samantha and Tyrell's real parentage. It was like a crack had opened in the fabric of the small town's uneasy peace, and Regina, never one to let cracks spread, moved quickly to seal it on her terms. She walked straight from their doorstep to the place she knew June would be, her mind rehearsing the words she would use, though her heart was already pounding with a cold certainty. June could not, would not, get those children back. June was sitting in the corner booth of the diner, stirring coffee she hadn't drunk, her eyes shadowed with a mix of defiance and exhaustion. Regina slid into the seat opposite her without asking. The conversation that followed was not the sort of small-town gossip-laced banter patrons might expect. It was quiet, sharp, surgical. Regina told her plainly, "Stay away from Samantha and Tyrell." She didn't raise her voice, but every syllable landed like a hammer. June tried to interrupt, to defend herself, but Regina cut through each protest. She spoke of the past, those things June had done that everyone whispered about, but no one said aloud in her presence. Each word was a reminder, each pause a weapon. For Regina, this wasn't just about protecting the children, it was about righting what she saw as an old injustice. She remembered the first time she saw Samantha and Tyrell in the group home, two kids who had learned to read adults like weather reports, bracing for storms that might never come. She'd sworn then she wouldn't be another gust of false hope in their lives. Yet when she went to the Child Services office weeks earlier, paperwork ready, determination blazing, she'd been told she was too late. June had already initiated the process to reclaim them. That was when Regina's resolve calcified into something else, a willingness to fight dirty if that was what it took. In the dim light of the diner, Regina shifted the conversation from confrontation to proposition. She leaned in, lowering her voice, making her tone almost gentle, the way one might soothe an injured animal before caging it. She acknowledged June's troubles, her debts, her struggles to find stable work, the lingering legal issues that hovered over her like dark clouds. And then she put an envelope on the table. Inside, cash. Not enough to change a life, but enough to tempt someone who had nowhere left to turn. She told June she could take the money, leave town, and start over somewhere else, anywhere but here. In exchange, Regina would take over as Samantha and Tyrell's guardian. June stared at the envelope, jaw tight, eyes darting as if she were calculating all the possible futures that could stem from this single moment. Regina, though, saw it differently. There was only one future worth having, and it was the one where the children stayed with her. The air between them was heavy, not with unspoken understanding, but with the recognition that this was a battle neither could afford to lose. What Jacob and Naomi hadn't told Regina, but what she suspected, was that June's connection to the children was more complicated than simple biology. Samantha, in particular, carried memories she refused to share with anyone except Tyrell, fragments of nights and voices and shadows that hinted at why June had lost custody in the first place. Tyrell, quieter but no less observant, had learned to guard his trust like it was currency. Regina didn't just want to be their legal guardian, she wanted to be the person they could finally stop guarding themselves against. The weeks that followed their diner meeting were a chess game played in silence. June didn't leave town, but she also didn't push forward with Child Services as quickly as she could have. Regina, meanwhile, worked the system from the inside, visiting the children more often, attending their school events, speaking with their caseworker about stability and continuity of care, with a practiced concern that sounded entirely altruistic. She brought Samantha books she'd once loved as a child herself, slipped Tyrell a set of drawing pencils after he'd been caught sketching in the margins of his homework. These gestures were genuine, but they were also strategic, each one weaving a tighter bond between her and the children. Still, the past wasn't as easy to silence as Regina wished. The town had a memory, and certain names, June's among them, called be scrubbed clean. Whispers resurfaced about the years June spent away, the people she ran with, the choices that led to her losing more than just custody. Regina, in quiet conversations with the right people, ensured those whispers found their way to child services. She never lied. She didn't have to. The truth, selectively framed, could be more damning than any invention. June, for her part, wasn't blind to what was happening. She saw the visits, heard the rumors, noticed how Regina always seemed one step ahead in the paperwork, the meetings, the narratives being spun. But she was trapped between pride and desperation. She'd made mistakes, terrible ones, and though she wanted to believe she could fix them, she didn't know if the system, or the people in it, would ever let her. One night, after another tense meeting with her caseworker, June showed up at Regina's doorstep. Her face was pale, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness, but there was a stubborn spark still burning. She told Regina she hadn't taken the money, not yet, but she was thinking about it. She wanted to know what exactly would happen if she did. Regina, masking her satisfaction, explained in soothing tones that the children would stay in town, with her, safe and cared for. June could write to them if she wanted, maybe even visit. She left the definition of maybe deliberately vague. Samantha overheard that conversation from the top of the stairs. She didn't understand all of it, but she understood enough to know something important was being decided without her input. She didn't tell Tyrell right away. She wanted to see how it unfolded. But in the days after, she began to test Regina in subtle ways, asking questions about her past, about what she thought of June, about whether she'd ever given up on someone before. Regina answered carefully, knowing these were not idle curiosities, but small probes into her character. Meanwhile, Tyrell, sensing his sister's unease, began keeping closer watch on both women. He didn't trust June, but he also didn't trust the way Regina always seemed to know exactly what to say. He'd grown up with too many adults who used kindness as currency, and while he liked Regina, he wasn't ready to believe that her interest in them came without a price. The stalemate stretched on, but beneath its surface, tensions deepened. Regina's position with the caseworker grew stronger, bolstered by the children's improved school performance and the visible stability of her home life. June's credibility, by contrast, eroded slowly under the weight of her past. Yet there was an unpredictability to Junia's refusal to vanish quietly that kept Regina from feeling entirely secure. Every time she thought she had closed the door on the possibility of June reclaiming the children, some new wrinkle would appear, a legal loophole, a sympathetic advocate, a half-forgotten acquaintance willing to speak on June's behalf. Through it all, Samantha and Tyrell found themselves caught in a tug-of-war they never asked to join. Their loyalty to each other was the only constant. They spoke in hushed tones at night, debating which adult was telling the truth, or if either of them truly was. The uncertainty gnawed at them, shaping the way they saw the world, where affection could be real, but could also be a weapon, and where the people who claimed to love you might also be the ones who kept you from deciding your own fate. And Regina, watching all of this unfold, knew she was running out of time to tip the balance entirely in her favor. The envelope of cash still sat in her desk drawer, ready to be offered again if June wavered. But she also began to consider other options, ones that would remove June from the equation permanently, not in any violent sense, but in ways that would make her physically or legally incapable of returning for the children. In Regina's mind, the end goal justified any method, because to her, this wasn't manipulation or betrayal. It was rescue. It was salvation. Regina had always believed that persistence was her strongest weapon, but as the days passed, she began to realize that persistence alone might not be enough. June's presence in town, lingering like a stubborn shadow, made every step forward feel precarious. It was one thing to sway caseworkers with a record of stability. It was another to ensure that no one could ever undo the life she was trying to build with Samantha and Tyrell. June, however, was playing her own quiet game. She no longer confronted Regina directly. Instead, she began to work on the children in ways Regina couldn't easily counter. A glance from across the street, a folded note slipped into Samantha's locker at school, a small stuffed toy left for Tyrell at the park. They weren't overt gestures, not enough to be deemed interference by child services, but they were enough to remind the children she was still there, still thinking of them. And in their world of shifting loyalties, even a reminder could be powerful. Samantha tried to hide the note she received, but Regina eventually found it tucked into the pages of one of her books. The handwriting was shaky, the words careful. "I'll explain everything when it's safe. Just remember I love you." Regina read it 3 times, her jaw tightening with each pass. She didn't confront Samantha immediately. She knew better than to create an open conflict, but the discovery shifted her strategy. If June wanted to work in whispers and shadows, Regina would illuminate every corner until there was nowhere left to hide. She started by requesting more frequent home visits from the caseworker, ensuring that every interaction with the children was documented. She brought in neighbors and teachers as character witnesses, subtly nudging them to speak about the stability she provided. And she made sure Samantha and Tyrell had no practical reason to look elsewhere, for care school supplies appeared before they were needed. Birthday celebrations were planned with precision, and even their smallest preferences were remembered. Regina knew that affection combined with consistency could be more persuasive than any accusation. But June was not acting alone. Unbeknownst to Regina, Jacob had begun meeting with her late at night in the back of the auto shop where he worked. He wasn't helping her out of loyalty to her past self. He didn't entirely trust her either, but he believed the children deserved the truth about where they came from. Naomi, torn between the two women, kept her distance, but passed along small pieces of information when she felt it was necessary. Together, they formed an uneasy alliance built on fragments of old ties and mutual suspicion of Regina's methods. As winter gave way to the first hints of spring, the tension reached a point where even the children could feel the air shift. Samantha grew quieter, her once curious nature turning inward. Tyrell began sketching more, filling page after page with abstract shapes that seemed to trap emotions he couldn't articulate. Regina noticed, but she attributed it to the normal growing pains of children adjusting to a new life. What she didn't see was that the drawings often included 2 distinct houses, one sturdy and well-kept, the other worn but familiar, connected by a single, fragile bridge. One afternoon, as Regina was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. It was the caseworker, but not for a scheduled visit. A complaint had been filed anonymous, but specific, alleging that Regina was manipulating the children to speak against their biological mother. Regina kept her expression calm, inviting the caseworker in and offering tea, but inside, she was already scanning through possibilities. Only a handful of people could have filed such a report, and she could guess exactly which one of them it was. This was more than a nuisance, it was a warning shot. If June was willing to involve official channels, then the subtle game they had been playing was about to escalate into open conflict. Regina decided she would have to move faster than planned. She quietly contacted a lawyer she knew from a previous custody case, initiating the paperwork for emergency guardianship on the grounds of emotional stability and continuity. It was a risky move, one that would require substantial proof, but Regina had been preparing for this moment longer than anyone realized. Meanwhile, June made her own preparations. She began gathering character witnesses from her past, not the ones who would damn her with stories of recklessness, but those who had seen her in her better moments. A former employer willing to testify about her dedication. A counselor who could speak to her progress in therapy. She knew the battle ahead would be decided not only by the present, but by who could paint the more convincing picture of the future. The children, caught in the crossfire, found themselves being asked subtle questions by both women. Who made you feel safer? Who listened to you more? Who understood you? They learned quickly that their answers mattered in ways that went far beyond the moment. Samantha, old enough to grasp the implications, began to play both sides, offering each adult just enough reassurance to keep the peace. Tyrell, less practiced in deception, grew restless, his drawings shifting from careful bridges to jagged lines that seemed to lead nowhere. The decisive moment came unexpectedly. A school field trip had been planned, and Regina volunteered to chaperone. But on the morning of the trip, she arrived to find that June was already there, claiming she had permission from the teacher to join as a special guest. The children's reactions told the story Regina feared most. Tyrell's face lit up, and Samantha hesitated just long enough before greeting Regina for the tension to be visible. For the entire trip, the two women circled each other in polite conversation, their words hiding sharp edges. June used the opportunity to ask the children open-ended questions about their interests, their dreams, their memories of the past. Regina stayed close, ensuring her presence was felt in every interaction. By the end of the day, the teacher, who had started out oblivious to the dynamic, could feel the undercurrent and made a mental note to mention it to the principal. In the weeks after, events began moving at a pace neither woman could fully control. The caseworkers scheduled an official review of the guardianship status. Jacob and Naomi were summoned for interviews. The lawyer Regina had hired pushed her to produce more concrete evidence of June's unfitness, while June's growing network of supporters urged her to stay patient and avoid any missteps. But patience was wearing thin on all sides. One evening, Samantha approached Regina directly, asking why she and June couldn't just agree to both be part of their lives. The question caught Regina off guard, and for a moment, she had no answer. That moment was enough for Samantha to sense that there was more being hidden than she'd been told. Tyrell, hearing about the conversation later, decided that the only way to get the truth was to confront June himself. What happened next would push the fragile balance into collapse. Tyrell's meeting with June did not stay secret for long, and when Regina found out, her reaction was not the measured, strategic calm she usually displayed. The anger she'd kept under control spilled over, and in that outburst, the children saw a side of her they had never witnessed before. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between these moments, between the legal maneuvering, the whispered alliances, and the desperate attempts to claim ownership over two young lives, the decision about Samantha and Tyrell's future was inching toward a point of no return, where no compromise would be possible, and someone would have to lose everything. The review hearing was set for a Thursday morning, and by the time the date arrived, the tension in town was palpable. Both Regina and June arrived early, each accompanied by their respective supporters. The small courthouse felt too cramped for the weight of what was at stake. Samantha and Tyrell were brought in by a neutral escort, their eyes darting between the two women who had been shaping their lives in ways neither child had fully chosen. The proceedings began with the caseworker's report measured, factual, and careful not to show bias. Regina's home was stable, the children's academic performance had improved, and she demonstrated consistent care. June, on the other hand, had made documented progress in therapy, held steady employment for the past year, and had multiple character witnesses attesting to her changed behavior. It was a balancing act on paper, each side with strengths and flaws, each capable of convincing a judge depending on the framing. When it came time for testimony, Regina spoke with practiced control. She painted a picture of two children who had already endured enough instability, who needed a guardian who would not falter, whose life was rooted in the community. She didn't attack June directly, she didn't have to, but her language was weighted with implication. June's past wasn't just a chapter, Regina suggested. It was a pattern. June's turn was different. She didn't try to erase her history. She acknowledged her mistakes openly, even listing them in a way that left the room quiet. But she pivoted quickly to what she had done and how losing her children had been the breaking point that forced her to confront herself. She spoke of the nights she spent wondering if she'd ever get another chance, and how she'd promised herself that if she did, she would never waste it. There was an unpolished sincerity in her words that made even Regina's lawyer glance up. The children were not called to testify directly, but their wishes were still considered. Letters had been submitted, written under supervision. Samantha's letter was cautious, diplomatic. She expressed love for both women, thanked Regina for her care, but admitted she wanted to know her mother better. Tyrell's was simpler. He wrote that he wanted everyone to stop fighting. He didn't choose sides, but the plea carried its own quiet weight. As the judge recessed to review the evidence, the two women sat on opposite sides of the room, avoiding each other's gaze. Jacob and Naomi exchanged a look that said more than words. They knew that whatever the outcome, someone would walk away feeling like justice had failed. When the judge returned, the verdict came quickly. Custody would be awarded to Regina, but with a condition. June would be granted scheduled visitation rights, supervised at first, with the possibility of expanding them if no issues arose over the next year. It was not the clean victory Regina had wanted, nor the full restoration June had fought for. But it was, in the court's eyes, a compromise that prioritized the children's immediate stability while acknowledging their right to know their biological mother. Regina's expression didn't change as the decision was read, but inside, she felt a fracture. She had fought to keep June out of the picture entirely, convinced it was the only way to protect Samantha and Tyrell. Now she would have to navigate a reality where June had a sanctioned place in their lives. The thought unsettled her more than she expected. June, on the other hand, exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it was something real, something she could build on. She glanced at the children as they were let out, catching Samantha's small, tentative smile and Tyrell's wide, searching eyes. In the weeks that followed, the arrangement proved harder than either woman anticipated. The children were cautious at first, unsure of how to act around June in a supervised setting. Regina found herself bracing for each visit, half expecting June to break the rules, half dreading that she wouldn't. And June struggled to keep her emotions contained, wanting to make every hour count while also knowing that too much eagerness might scare the children away. But slowly, the edges softened. Samantha began to ask Regina questions about her visits, not in a confrontational way, but with curiosity. Tyrell started bringing his drawings to show June, sometimes even sketching her into the sturdy house alongside Regina. The bridge in his art was still there, but it no longer looked fragile. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when a visit had to be moved indoors. The children were restless and a board game was pulled from the shelf. What began as awkward, stilted play turned into laughter first from the children, then from both women. For a brief moment, the competition and suspicion fell away, replaced by something neither had allowed themselves to imagine: coexistence. It didn't erase the past. There were still arguments, still moments where the old mistrust flared. Regina still questioned whether June's change was permanent, and June still feared that Regina would use any slip against her. But the children noticed that the yelling had stopped, that they no longer felt the need to guard every word. Regina and June stood side by side watching Samantha and Tyrell race toward the finish line in a three-legged sack race. Neither spoke, but both clapped and cheered, their voices blending into the same sound. It wasn't friendship, not yet. But it was no longer war. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough for the children and maybe, eventually, for them too.